I think that was a really great point that Michael made at the very beginning about, the consumer data right, but what do we have before we have the consumer data right? Because, the theme of this conference is data, not the consumer data right. We've talked a lot about the consumer data right, but in Victoria we've had all this data, rich data for everybody for years, without any consumer data right. Sure, there's some regulation around rights and privacy, but there's no proper framework for it. And yeah, there's been all these benefits, but there's also been a lot of uncertainty and a lot of difficulty and a bit of mess. So I think that's really good to keep in mind that the data's there and it's going to be used anyway. Having the right framework's really important. And then, how do we make the framework? I guess I sort of think about, from a consumer perspective, I sort of think about the use of data in two main ways for consumer benefit. And one is that direct consumer benefit, an individual consumer, household or whatever, being able to use their own data for their own benefit, information, etc., whether that's helping to make investments in home technology, or whether it's helping to choose a retailer in the complex market, etc. And the other way is that broader sort of community good use of data. And we had some presentations earlier today on that, those great projects around, understanding how people use appliances in order to better plan and understand household behaviour for the benefit of the whole sort of system, as well as the project that Sangeetha's been working on with looking at PV penetration and understanding how these things actually happen in our community, and sort of confounding some of our expectations, because one of the great findings from Sangeetha's project was, well, PV penetration is not aligned with higher income areas like we sometimes assume, but it's actually a bit more across the board. So they're really useful uses of data. These are the benefits, but there's three parts to this, and as well as the benefits, we've got the risks and we've got the costs. And I guess from my point of view, if we're trying to really bring the benefits of this to ordinary people, then we really need to make sure that we do deal with the risks of it going pear-shaped. And we had some examples from Queensland of retailers redlining people based on knowing their data and deciding that they weren't really a good customer for them. There's a risk of how can people have trust in a third party and know that they'll get good information from the data that they have shared in order to get information. And there's a whole big question about consumer protections. How do they work in the data space when there's lots of different types of organisations outside the normal sort of regulatory framework? And these are all things that we talked about these last couple of days, and that are all really important to get right. I think another point that's been talked about a bit here has been consumer engagement in energy markets, and how can data help consumers engage better, or even more so, and I think, again, it's been raised particularly by a few people, how can good data well used mean that people don't have to engage? There was an example given, I think yesterday, about some of the banking stuff. You use PayWave or PayID, you don't know that you're using a third party, you don't care, you don't have to engage, you just know that you can do it and it works. And that's sort of an ideal scenario of people being able to use their own data through whatever network of third parties or whatever in place, that just the system works properly and people get what they need. And that's sort of the world that we're trying to head to, and I think the challenge for us is to look at all the detail of what we're putting together in that framework along the way to get there. I think the trust is a huge issue. Probably in particular, I think with the broader sort of community use of data. I mean, we give up our data to all sorts of companies, often begrudgingly. No one's really happy about Facebook knowing everything about them, or Google, but we sort of go, oh, look, the trade-off's worth it because I'm getting something that I want. But we do that begrudgingly. And if people are going to be giving some sort of consent for their data to be used by researchers, advocates, etc., well, they also need to have some trust that, okay, it's actually going to be used for a good purpose, and I can feel okay about sharing my data with organisations to do that. And I think that the Energize project with Cyro is a good example of actually, they really look carefully at how do we get the social license to do this data. Probably the last thing for me, really, aside from the other option of talking for half an hour, is like the cost issue. And we talked about this in the last session that I went to. And the Victorian smart meter rollout's a great example. Like, it cost a bomb. It cost Victorians about $1,000 per household to get those meters and all the commas in place. And there's no doubt that we've got great benefit and great opportunity from that infrastructure. But it's still hard to figure out, is it really worth $1,000 for each person? You know, some people are getting more than $1,000 value from it. You know, some people not so much. So that's a big question. And yeah, I think that we need to be really careful of the way that we look at the costs of the framework. You know, let's get, as we've said, let's get the right framework done in the right efficient way, done in a way that works well and sort of covers off these risks for everyone. And I guess we'll be trying to figure that out for the next long while. So, thanks.